The Obama administration has imposed a set of unprecedented measures against Russia over its alleged attempts to influence the U.S. presidential campaign this year. Now, the sanctions target two Russian main intelligence agencies. They also single out three companies that supposedly provided support for Russian cyber operations against the Democratic Party. 4 top military intelligence officials have been blacklisted from the U.S., and 35 Russian diplomats have been ordered to leave the United States along with their families within 72 hours. Finally, 2 Russian compounds in New York and Maryland are being shut down. They were supposedly being used by Russian personnel for intelligence-related purposes. Now, the new sanctions were unveiled after the release of a joint report by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. RT's Caleb Maupin has more.
This report, it goes into detail, describes a lot of software and computer technology, but it never explains what proof that they have that all of this stuff is linked to Russia. There's no real proof or evidence that the tools they're describing or the technology they're describing is being used by people associated with Russia or the Russian government. Furthermore, this report from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI actually contains a disclaimer. It actually says that this report is for informational purposes only, and that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security do not provide any warranties with the report. So very interesting developments. Now, Obama is set to leave office very soon. He will be leaving the White House, and on January 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the new president of the United States. People are speculating that it's not going to be a very smooth transition, as they clearly have very different assessments of why the U.S. presidential election ended up the way it did.
The lack of specifics in the report has inspired some satire online. One user offered this list of valuable data contained in the report. And a prominent cybersecurity expert compared the FBI to a child activity center, saying the agency's accusations against Moscow are like writing "Russia did it" in crayon. We discussed the allegations against Russia with Annie Mashani, whistleblower and former MI5 officer.
Just covering their backs, aren't they? They know it's a bunch of rubbish. I mean, the fact that they're not actually standing by, they're not warranting the report they put out today, the Department of Homeland Security, rather points to the fact that it is pure propaganda, and they know it. There's a lot of information in there about, you know, the technological spec, that sort of thing. They're trying to blind people with science, but there's no real evidence. Now, of course, running in parallel to this is a more serious investigation that Barack Obama apparently asked the CIA to carry out into this alleged Russian hacking of the election. And that report is due to be announced no later than the 20th of January next year. Now, bearing in mind that's actually the date of President-elect Trump's inauguration, that's very interesting timing.
The Russian president's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has called the U.S. sanctions unlawful. This is what he had to say.
We regret that this decision has been taken by the U.S. administration and by President Obama personally. We are now analyzing the details of the announcement. As we have said previously, we consider these sanctions to be groundless and a violation of international law. We dismiss all of the baseless allegations that have been made against Russia. From our point of view, these sanctions illustrate the unpredictable and aggressive nature of the Obama administration's foreign policy. We think there are 2 goals behind this decision taken by the administration, which is leaving office in 3 weeks. The first is to harm the already strained relationship between Moscow and Washington, and the second is to obstruct the foreign policy plans of the incoming Trump administration. The second of those is an internal issue for the United States, and Americans need to figure out to what extent it is correct and legal. At this stage, I cannot say what retaliation will follow from our side, but clearly the principle of reciprocity must stand. An appropriate response will be made, depending on what President Putin decides.
RT's Murad Gazdiev has more on the reaction from Russian officials to the latest announcement from Washington.
Peskov said that these sanctions are unpredictable, that these sanctions are aggressive, and most of all, that they are baseless. That, still, despite all the rhetoric, everything they've said, they have still not offered any proof that Russia or any Russian was behind this, that the Russian government had any role in any sort of hacking. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, she was curt and more direct.
Today, the U.S. has been humiliated. not by terrorists or enemies, but by its own president. Washington has received a slap from its master, who has doubled the upcoming administration's problems.
Of course, here there are countermeasures that are going to follow. They're going to decide on what they are. And from what I've been hearing, it's very likely that they'll be moderate, that they won't want to ruin relations further with the new U.S. president coming in. Nevertheless, the foreign ministry says on Friday we'll know exactly what Russia's going to do about this. Donald Trump is coming in and he's going to inherit a political diplomatic disaster. There is the opinion that Barack Obama is using his last few weeks in office to return personal favors. Look at the UN Security Council resolution regarding Israel. Israel is absolutely convinced that that was the work of Barack Obama, who had a very difficult relationship with Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. We know he had a very difficult relationship with Vladimir Putin, and now he's using his last few weeks in office to, somewhat symbolically sanctioning the Russian military intelligence, Russian FSB, the FBI equivalent. I mean, you've got to ask yourself, what's the point?
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has issued a statement on the new measures against Russia. He called on the United States to move on to bigger and better things. And he said he will meet with intelligence chiefs next week to hear the facts on the situation.